While the media spent the last 6 months telling you to watch Bitcoin ETF inflows and Ethereum staking upgrades, something happened inside the global banking infrastructure that almost nobody in the retail crypto space even noticed. A network that moves over $150 trillion a year in cross-border settlements quietly began accelerating its transition off of correspondent banking rails. And the asset they're migrating toward? It is not Bitcoin. It is not Ethereum. And it is definitely not whatever new project got trending on X this week. The signal was clear, but only for those who are actually looking. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, why the mainstream financial press buried it, and why what you're about to hear should remove every last doubt you have about where this is going. Welcome back to Crypto Regency. I don't do hype videos. I don't chase price predictions. What I do is read the structure, the financial architecture being built underneath all the noise, and I tell you what I see. Today, what I see is a convergence that has been years in the making, and it is now visible to anyone willing to look past the headline numbers. Let me start with the hard truth that most retail investors are not equipped to process. The global financial system does not care about your portfolio. It does not care about your altcoin bags. It does not care about which influencer is shilling what on social media today. What it cares about, what it has always cared about, is liquidity, settlement speed, and counterparty risk. Here is what most people miss. When we talk about cross-border payments, the conversation always defaults to remittances. Somebody sending money back home to their family. Western Union, MoneyGram, small transfers. That's what retail investors visualize. That is not where the money is. The real battleground, the one that represents trillions of dollars in trapped capital, is Nostro and Vostro accounts. Right now, today, banks around the world are required to pre-fund accounts in foreign currencies, in foreign countries, just to be ready to settle transactions. $27 trillion, sitting, idle, locked in a system designed in the 1970s, not earning yield, not moving, just sitting there as a buffer so that when Bank A needs to pay Bank B in a different country, the money is already on the other side. Think about that. $27 trillion in dead capital just to keep the plumbing from breaking. Now ask yourself this. What happens when you introduce a bridge currency, a neutral, permissioned, real-time settlement asset that makes pre-funding accounts unnecessary? What happens when those banks no longer need to lock up $27 trillion because settlement can happen in 3 to 5 seconds for a fraction of a cent? That capital gets unlocked, and the asset facilitating that unlock accrues enormous demand pressure. David Schwartz, the Chief Technology Officer at Ripple, has been explaining this since the early days. The design was always about solving the Nostro-Vostro problem, not retail, not speculation, the institutional plumbing of global finance. This is the foundation most people have never understood. And it's why the math, when you actually sit down and run it, will absolutely floor you. Let's do the math that the retail crowd consistently ignores. Cross-border payment flows, $150 trillion annually. That's not a number I'm making up. That's the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks. Forex market daily volume, $7.5 trillion per day. Derivatives market notional value, $1.2 quadrillion. That is not a typo, $1.2 quadrillion. Now, XRP has a fixed total supply of 100 billion tokens. Not inflationary, not printable. Fixed. Of that, approximately 55 to 57 billion are in circulation today. The rest is in Ripple's escrow, and the data shows the majority of monthly escrow releases are returned. The effective liquid tradable float is tighter than most people realize. Here's where the math becomes unavoidable. For XRP to serve as a bridge currency in even a fraction of daily Forex flows, the asset's price must reflect the liquidity capacity required. You cannot move $7.5 trillion a day through a $50 billion asset. The math doesn't allow it. The market cap of the bridge asset must scale with the value it bridges. This is not a moonboy fantasy. This is a design requirement. It is a liquidity physics problem. If XRP captures just 1% of daily Forex volume, 1%, that is $75 billion moving through the network, daily. Think about what that does to demand pressure on an asset with a fixed, shrinking float. And here's the number that should make you sit down. Exchange reserves for XRP are currently sitting near multi-year lows. On-chain forensic analysts and exchange reserve data from platforms like CryptoQuant are showing a consistent trend of tokens leaving exchanges and moving to cold storage. When tokens leave exchanges, they are not coming back for a 10% swing trade. Institutions moving assets into multi-signature cold storage vaults are positioning for a time horizon that retail investors can't even see from where they're standing. This isn't a prediction. It is the logical mathematical outcome of a fixed supply asset being adopted as the settlement layer for a $150 trillion payment system. The math doesn't care what you believe. It just runs. Now let's look at what the smart money is actually doing, because this is where the retail narrative and the institutional reality completely diverge. While retail investors were debating whether XRP was dead after every market correction, Ripple was executing on a global expansion strategy that reads like a masterclass in quiet dominance. Ripple's acquisition of Hidden Road, a prime brokerage firm that clears over $3 trillion in transactions annually, did not happen by accident. Prime brokerages are the infrastructure through which institutional capital flows. When Ripple acquires a firm sitting at that junction, they are not speculating. They are embedding XRP into the infrastructure layer of institutional finance. This is not retail adoption. This is the pipes being replaced. Look at Japan. The Financial Services Agency of Japan, one of the most conservative, process-driven financial regulators on the planet, has been working with XRP-based settlement infrastructure through SBI Holdings for years. SBI isn't a startup. SBI is one of Japan's largest financial institutions. They don't take speculative positions. They take structural positions. And they are long XRP. Look at the Digital Asset Clarity Act working its way through U.S. regulatory frameworks. Ask yourself this brutal question. Does a firm like Franklin Templeton, which manages over $1.5 trillion in assets, publicly state that Bitcoin is the greatest distraction from the greatest disruption to financial services, unless they have already decided where they are actually positioning? Franklin Templeton doesn't issue statements like that for entertainment. They issue statements like that because they have already moved. And while all of this was happening, while the institutional plumbing was being replaced quietly and methodically, the mainstream media was running Bitcoin ETF coverage on a loop. Same story, same talking heads, same loop. Because retail attention is the product being sold. The institutions do not need your attention. They need your tokens. Here is what's on the near-term horizon and why the convergence is accelerating. The stablecoin legislation moving through Congress is not just about stablecoins. It is the foundational layer for digitizing sovereign currency. Once every major economy has a programmable digital currency, they need an interoperability layer, a neutral bridge that can move value between the digital dollar, the digital euro, the digital yen, without any single nation controlling the rail. That is not Bitcoin. That is not Ethereum. The asset purpose-built for that role is XRP, operating through the Interledger Protocol, the RLUSD stablecoin, Ripple's own dollar-pegged stablecoin, is not a side project. It is the on-ramp. When RLUSD achieves broad institutional adoption, every transaction that moves in and out of RLUSD creates XRP demand as the settlement bridge underneath. The system feeds itself. And here is the final piece. The Federal Reserve is in a rate cut cycle. Liquidity expansion is coming back into the global financial system. Every time the cost of capital drops, risk-on appetite returns. But this time, the infrastructure being built on top of that liquidity wave is not speculative. It is regulatory compliant, institutionally backed, and purpose-built for the financial system that is replacing the old one. When the liquidity arrives and the regulatory gates open simultaneously, and both of those things are already in motion, the window that exists right now will not exist anymore. That is not a scare tactic. That is a sequence of events with visible dates attached to them. Let me be clear about what is actually happening to the available supply right now. We are moving from an era of abundance to an era of structural scarcity. Exchange reserves near multi-year lows, tokens moving to cold storage, monthly escrow releases being absorbed and relocked by Ripple at a rate that tells you the organic demand is already outpacing casual retail participation. Here is a concept most retail investors have never considered: drops. One XRP is divisible into 1 million drops. When institutional ODL, on-demand liquidity, corridors are processing at scale, the transactions are measured not in whole XRP, but in micro-units. The system was designed to function at a price point where large-value transactions require only a small number of tokens. That design assumption tells you everything about where the architects of this system believed the price was ultimately heading. Once a token enters a multi-signature institutional vault positioned for the long-term restructuring of global payment rails, it does not come back to the market for a 10% swing. The crowd that has been shaken out, the crowd that sold at a loss, the crowd that kept waiting for permission from mainstream media to believe in what they were holding, they will be the exit liquidity funding the final accumulation phase. That phase is not years away. The indicators are visible right now for anyone willing to read them. I know some of you are watching this after a week of red candles. I know the macro headlines make it hard to stay focused on the structural picture. I know that when your portfolio is down, everything that sounded obvious 6 months ago starts to feel uncertain. Here is what I need you to understand as a rational analyst. Being early feels exactly like being wrong, right up until the moment the reality catches up to the thesis. Every transformational technology in history, the internet, mobile payments, cloud infrastructure, had an adoption curve that felt impossibly slow from the inside and impossibly fast in retrospect. We are inside that curve right now. The feeling of uncertainty you have is not evidence that the thesis is broken. It is evidence that the thesis is still early. The question is not whether the system gets built. The system is being built. The acquisitions are real. The regulatory frameworks are real. The institutional positioning is real. The on-chain data is real. The only question is whether you will still be holding when the structure that is being assembled in the background becomes visible to everyone at the same time. Because when that moment arrives, you will not get a warning, and you will not get a second chance at current prices. While the crowd is staring at the noise, the signal has never been clearer. Here is the single most important thing I want you to take away from today's video. The banks did not accidentally start adopting XRP infrastructure. The regulators did not accidentally start building legal frameworks that favor permissioned settlement assets. The trillion-dollar asset managers did not accidentally start calling Bitcoin a distraction. These are not coincidences. They are the visible edges of a system that was designed long before most of us were paying attention. You are not speculating. You are positioned. There is a difference. Stay patient. Stay rational. Stay in your conviction. And do not let the noise of the short term shake you out of the most important financial positioning of your lifetime. If you made it to the end of this one, drop signal in the comments below. I want to know who here is actually reading the structure and not just watching the price. As always, in a market driven by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. I'll see you in the next one.